The gunshot that tore through the afternoon silence sent a flock of ravens scattering from the cottonwoods, their dark wings beating against the Montana sky like omens of the violence unfolding below. Vivienne Sinclair pressed herself against the rough bark of a pine tree, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribcage, while three men on horseback circled the overturned stagecoach like wolves around wounded prey. She had been traveling from Boston to Miles City, Montana, carrying her precious telescope and astronomical charts when the bandits struck. The driver lay motionless in the dirt, and the guard who had tried to defend them had fled into the hills on foot, leaving her alone with these men whose eyes held nothing but greed and cruelty. Her leather satchel, containing years of celestial observations and calculations, lay trampled in the dust near the coach's shattered wheel. "Come out, lady," one of them called, his voice rough as gravel. "We know you ran into them trees. We just want what you got, and maybe we'll let you walk away." Vivienne knew that was a lie. She had seen their faces, heard them laugh as they shot the driver without warning. Her fingers trembled as she clutched her skirts, the expensive fabric already torn and dusty from her desperate scramble for cover. She was 24 years old, had studied at the finest institutions back east, could calculate the trajectory of distant planets and predict eclipses years in advance. But none of that knowledge told her how to survive this moment. The sound of hoofbeats grew closer, and she could hear branches snapping as one of the bandits guided his horse into the tree line. She closed her eyes and thought of her father, who had encouraged her dreams of mapping the stars, who had died believing she would make discoveries that would change how humanity understood the cosmos. She thought of the observatory she had planned to build outside Miles City, where the skies stretched vast and unpolluted by city lights. Then another gunshot cracked through the air, but this one came from a different direction. Vivienne's eyes flew open as she heard a man shout in pain, followed by the thunder of more hoofbeats approaching fast. Through the gaps in the trees, she glimpsed a rider coming hard down the ridge, his horse kicking up clouds of dust, his rifle already swinging toward the bandits. "Federal Marshal coming through," a strong voice rang out. "Drop your weapons and get your hands where I can see them." The bandits scattered like startled quail, firing wild shots as they spurred their horses toward the open plains. The rider pursued them with the single-minded focus of a hawk diving for prey, his rifle barking twice more. One bandit tumbled from his saddle, while the other two rode harder, their horses stretched out in full gallop across the grassland. The marshal could have kept chasing them, but instead he wheeled his horse around and came back toward the trees where Vivienne hid. She stepped out cautiously, her legs shaking so badly she had to grip a low branch to stay upright. The man who rode toward her sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders outlined against the brilliant Montana sky. He wore a dark hat pulled low, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, and a silver star pinned to his chest. As he drew closer, Vivienne could make out a strong jaw shadowed with several days of stubble, serious gray eyes that swept the area for threats, and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with barely a sound despite his height. He had to be well over 6 feet, Vivienne realized, as he approached with his rifle still held ready in one hand. "Are you hurt, miss?" His voice was calmer now, edged with concern. Up close, she could see he was probably in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if not for the tension and alertness that currently tightened his features. "No, I don't think so," Vivienne managed, though her voice came out thinner than she would have liked. But the driver, he was shot, and the guard ran away, and they took everything from the coach. The marshal glanced toward the overturned stagecoach, his jaw tightening. "Stay here," he said, though his tone was more gentle than commanding. He walked toward the fallen driver, knelt beside him, and after a moment of checking, removed his hat and bowed his head briefly. When he looked back at Vivienne, the answer was clear in his eyes before he spoke. "I'm sorry, miss." "He's gone." Vivienne felt tears sting her eyes, though she had not known the driver beyond their brief introduction that morning. He had been a kind man, middle-aged, with laugh lines around his eyes. He had told her about his wife who made the best huckleberry pie in the territory, and now he would never taste it again. The marshal was speaking again, and she forced herself to focus on his words. "My name is Ethan Rivers. I'm a deputy marshal out of Miles City. I was tracking those men for a robbery they pulled 3 days ago in Glendive. Are you heading to Miles City?" "Yes," Vivienne said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm Vivienne Sinclair. I'm supposed to be setting up an observatory there, or I was before all this." Ethan's eyebrows rose slightly. "An observatory? You mean for looking at stars and such?" "Yes, exactly that." Vivienne walked toward the overturned coach on unsteady legs. "My equipment was in the luggage compartment. If they took it, if they damaged my telescope, I have nothing. Everything I own is in those cases." She reached the coach and felt a surge of relief when she saw that the bandits, in their haste, had only grabbed the obvious valuables, the mail pouch, a strong box that probably contained payroll for one of the ranches, and the passenger's luggage. Her equipment cases, marked with scientific supply labels that meant nothing to illiterate thieves, lay scattered but intact near the broken wheel. Ethan helped her drag the heavy wooden cases away from the wreckage. "These are solid built," he observed, running a hand over the reinforced corners. "Whatever is inside should be protected." "My telescope," Vivienne explained, kneeling beside the largest case and checking the locks. "And my charts, my reference books, my calculation tools. They represent 7 years of work and every dollar my father left me when he passed." Her voice caught on that last part, and she had to pause to steady herself. Ethan crouched beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "We will get you and your equipment to Miles City safely. I give you my word on that, Miss Sinclair." There was something in the way he said it, with absolute conviction, that made Vivienne believe him. She looked up and met his eyes, those steady gray eyes that reminded her somehow of the color of the sky just before dawn. "Thank you, Marshal Rivers. I don't know what would have happened if you had not arrived when you did. Call me Ethan, please." He stood and offered her his hand to help her up. His palm was calloused and warm against hers, his grip strong but careful. "And I wish I could say I was just lucky to be in the right place, but the truth is I have been tracking those 3 since they killed a rancher and his son during their last robbery. When I heard the shots, I knew it was them." Vivienne felt a chill despite the warm September afternoon. "Will they come back?" "Not today, and probably not ever. I got one of them, and the other 2 are riding hard for the border. They know I will be after them, and they know the next posse will not stop until they are caught or killed." Ethan looked at the horizon where the bandits had disappeared, his expression hardening. "But we should not stay here in the open. Can you ride?" "I can manage," Vivienne said, though in truth she had limited experience with horses. Boston carriages and the occasional riding lesson in a controlled paddock had not prepared her for the reality of the western frontier. Ethan seemed to read her hesitation because his expression softened. "My horse is steady and well trained. You will ride with me, and we will pony your equipment on a horse from the coach team. It is about 15 miles to Miles City, and we should make it before full dark if we leave now." The next hour was a flurry of activity. Ethan gathered the surviving horses from the stagecoach team, two sturdy bay geldings who had broken free of the traces when the coach overturned. He rigged up a pack saddle arrangement for Vivienne's equipment cases, distributing the weight carefully across both animals. Then he wrapped the driver's body respectfully and secured it to the third horse. "His family deserves to bury him proper," Ethan said quietly when Vivienne looked at him questioningly. "No man should be left for the coyotes, especially not one who died trying to protect passengers." That simple statement of decency told Vivienne more about Ethan Rivers than any formal introduction could have. She watched him work with practiced efficiency, his movements economical and sure, and found herself feeling safer than she had since leaving Boston 3 weeks ago. When everything was ready, Ethan mounted his horse, a tall chestnut gelding with intelligent eyes and a white blaze down its face. He reached down to help Vivienne up, and she found herself settled sideways in front of him, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. The position felt almost scandalously intimate, but there was nothing improper in the way he held her carefully, respectfully, like she was something precious that might break if handled roughly. "Comfortable as you can be?" he asked near her ear, and she felt warmth flood through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "Yes," she managed. "Thank you." They started out at a steady walk, the pack horses trailing behind on lead ropes. The rhythm of the horse's gait was soothing, and despite everything that had happened, Vivienne found herself relaxing slightly against Ethan's chest. He was solid and warm behind her, and she could feel the steady beat of his heart through his shirt. "So," Ethan said after they had ridden in silence for a while, "an astronomer. That is not something you see every day out here. What brings you all the way to Montana territory?" Vivienne welcomed the distraction from her churning thoughts. "The skies here are perfect for observation. Back east, there is too much light from the cities, too much smoke from the factories. But out here the air is clear and the stars are so bright and numerous. I am working on mapping star clusters in the northern celestial hemisphere, and I needed somewhere with minimal light pollution and high elevation. And you chose Miles City for that." There was a note of amusement in his voice. "It is not exactly what you would call high elevation." "No, but it is central to several locations I plan to use. There are plateaus and high ridges within a day's ride that will be perfect. And the town has telegraph service, which I need to coordinate observations with colleagues back east." Vivienne turned her head slightly to look up at him. "I purchased property on the north side of town, about 3 miles out. 10 acres with a good hill that should provide excellent viewing conditions." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I know that area. Good land, and far enough from town that you will not get much interference from lights or noise." "But it is isolated. You planning to live out there alone?" "I was planning to hire someone local to help me build the observatory structure and perhaps a small house. I have enough funds for that, I think, if I am careful." She paused, then added more quietly, "I had not really thought about the isolation. Back home, I lived with my aunt in the city. There were always people around." "Montana is different," Ethan said, and she could hear the affection in his voice. "Space and silence as much as you want of both. But it can be lonely if you are not used to it. You will want to make connections in town, find some friends. Miles City has some good people, though it has its share of rough characters too." "Is that why you became a marshal, to deal with the rough characters?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, and Vivienne wondered if she had overstepped. But then he spoke, his voice thoughtful. "I became a marshal because I saw what happens when there is no law, when the strong just take what they want from the weak. I grew up on a ranch in Wyoming, and when I was 16, A gang came through and killed my father over a land dispute. My mother died 2 years later, never really recovering from the grief. I realized then that someone had to stand between decent people and the ones who would prey on them. "I'm so sorry," Vivienne said softly. "That must have been terrible. It was a long time ago. I have made my peace with it, mostly. But it is why I do what I do, why I could not let those bandits just ride away." His arms tightened slightly around her, though she thought he might not even be aware of doing it. "Why I could not leave you there alone." They rode on through the changing afternoon light, the landscape unfolding around them in shades of gold and green. The prairie grass rippled in the wind like waves on an ocean, and in the distance, Vivienne could see the darker line that marked the Yellowstone River. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermal currents, and once they startled a small herd of pronghorn antelope that bounded away with impossible grace. Ethan pointed out landmarks as they traveled, his voice low and pleasant. He showed her where the old buffalo trails still marked the land, though the great herds were mostly gone now. He pointed to a distant butte where Crow scouts used to watch for enemies, and to a creek where Lewis and Clark had camped on their expedition 70 years before. "You know a lot about this country," Vivienne observed. "I have spent most of my life out here. You learn the land, or the land teaches you harsh lessons." He shifted slightly in the saddle. "What about you? What was it like growing up back east?" Vivienne found herself talking more freely than she usually did with strangers. Maybe it was the intimacy of their position, or the aftermath of the danger they had survived, or simply something about Ethan himself that made her feel safe opening up. She told him about her childhood in Boston, her father who had been a professor of mathematics, and who had first shown her the moons of Jupiter through a borrowed telescope when she was 8 years old. She described her years of study, often as the only woman in rooms full of male scholars who either dismissed her or treated her as an oddity. "That must have been frustrating," Ethan said. "Being just as smart as them, maybe smarter, and having them look down on you for it. You have no idea." Vivienne felt a rush of gratitude that he understood so quickly. "Even my published papers were questioned. People assumed my father must have written them, or that I had help from male colleagues. No matter how much I proved myself, there was always doubt. Well, out here, people care more about what you can do than what your gender is. It is still not easy for women, do not misunderstand me. But if you can do good work and hold your own, most folks will respect that." Ethan paused. "And anyone who does not respect you will answer to the law." "That is part of my job too, making sure everyone gets fair treatment." The sun was lowering toward the western horizon when Miles City finally came into view. It sprawled along the north bank of the Yellowstone River, a collection of wooden buildings, tents, and newly constructed brick structures that spoke of a town in transition from rough frontier outpost to permanent settlement. Vivienne could see the bridge spanning the river, the stockyards on the south side, and what looked like a substantial main street lined with businesses. "It is bigger than I expected," she admitted. "Growing fast," Ethan agreed. The Northern Pacific Railroad came through 4 years ago in 1881, and that changed everything. We get supplies from back east now in days instead of months. More people settling, more ranches starting up. Give it another 10 years and it will probably be twice this size." As they rode down the main street, people turned to look. Some called out greetings to Ethan, who responded with nods and brief waves. Vivienne was aware of curious eyes on her, taking in her dusty traveling dress, her disheveled hair, the way she sat in front of the marshal on his horse. Ethan seemed to sense her discomfort. "Small towns," he said quietly. "Everyone notices everything. But do not worry, I will make sure your reputation stays intact. We will get you to the hotel, get you settled proper." He pulled up in front of a 2-story building with a painted sign that read McQueen Hotel. A covered porch ran along the front, and through the windows, Vivienne could see a respectable-looking lobby. Ethan dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. His hand spanned her waist easily as he lifted her, setting her gently on the ground. For a moment they stood very close, and Vivienne found herself looking up into his eyes, those gray eyes that had seemed so serious when she first saw them, but that now held warmth, and something else she could not quite name. "Marshal Rivers," a woman's voice called from the hotel doorway. "What excitement have you brought us this time?" Ethan stepped back, and Vivienne felt an odd sense of loss at the broken contact. She turned to see a handsome woman in her 40s descending from the porch, her dark hair pinned up elegantly, her dress stylish but practical. "Mrs. McQueen," Ethan said with genuine warmth. "I need a room for Miss Sinclair here. She was on the stagecoach that got held up this afternoon, and she will be needing a place to stay while she gets settled in town." Mrs. McQueen's expression shifted immediately to concern. "Oh, you poor dear. Are you hurt? Come inside, let me get you some tea and draw you a bath. You look done in." She took Vivienne's arm with maternal firmness, already guiding her toward the hotel. Over her shoulder, she called back to Ethan, "Bring her things in when you can, Marshal. And you come by later, I will want to hear the full story." Vivienne looked back at Ethan, suddenly reluctant to leave his presence. He gave her a reassuring smile. "You are in good hands with Mrs. McQueen. I need to take care of the horses and report what happened to the sheriff. But I will check on you later, make sure you have everything you need." Then she was being swept inside, into a world of polished wood floors and wallpapered walls, of women's voices offering sympathy and help. Mrs. McQueen was introducing her to the hotel staff, ordering hot water for a bath, sending someone to fetch clean towels. It was all happening so fast that Vivienne's head spun. But even as she was led upstairs to a clean, comfortable room, even as she sank into the blessed relief of a hot bath and let the dust and fear of the day wash away, her thoughts kept returning to Ethan Rivers, to his steady hands and steady voice, to the way he had wrapped the dead driver with respect and promised to get her safely to Miles City, to the warmth she had felt pressed against him during the long ride, the sense that here, finally, was someone who saw her as she truly was and did not find her lacking. By the time Vivienne had bathed, changed into the one dress from her luggage that had survived the robbery unscathed, and made her way down to the hotel dining room, the full weight of her situation was settling on her shoulders. She had lost most of her clothes. Her money had been in a purse that was now in the hands of bandits, and she was stranded in a strange town with no immediate way to access her funds from Boston. Mrs. McQueen seemed to anticipate her concerns. She appeared at Vivienne's table with a pot of tea and a plate of fresh bread and butter. "The marshal explained what happened," she said, sitting down across from Vivienne with the easy familiarity of someone who did not stand on excessive ceremony. "He also left money to cover your room and board for the next week. Said it was the territory's responsibility since you were on an official mail coach when you were robbed." Vivienne felt tears prick her eyes again, this time from gratitude. "That is very kind of him. That is Ethan Rivers for you. He is one of the good ones." Mrs. McQueen poured tea for both of them. "Now, I understand you are planning to stay in Miles City, build some kind of observatory." "That was my plan, yes. I own property north of town, though I have not seen it yet. I was going to meet with the land agent tomorrow and start making arrangements to build." Vivienne sipped her tea, letting the warmth steady her. Though I suppose that might be delayed now until I can sort out my finances. The telegraph office can help with that. They can wire your bank in Boston, have them confirm your identity and arrange a transfer of funds. Might take a few days, but it is faster than waiting for mail. Mrs. McQueen buttered a piece of bread and pushed it toward Vivienne. Eat something, dear. You have had a terrible shock, and you need to keep your strength up. Vivienne ate, surprised by how hungry she was. As she did, Mrs. McQueen kept up a stream of comfortable conversation, pointing out other diners and giving quick sketches of who they were. The rancher in the corner was Tom Bradley, who ran cattle on 10,000 acres east of town. The woman in the green dress was Sarah Chen, whose family ran the best restaurant in Miles City. The man reading a newspaper was Dr. Franklin, who had studied in Chicago and been practicing here for 3 years. It is a good town, Mrs. McQueen concluded. Growing pains, certainly, and we still get trouble from rough characters passing through. But the people who have put down roots here, they are solid folks who will help a neighbor in need. As if summoned by the conversation, the dining room door opened and Ethan walked in. He had cleaned up since Vivienne last saw him, his face freshly shaved, his dark hair damp and combed back. He wore a clean shirt and had traded his dusty vest for a jacket, though the marshal's star still gleamed on his chest. When his eyes found Vivienne across the room, his expression lightened into a smile that made her heart skip. He crossed to their table and removed his hat. "Miss Sinclair, Mrs. McQueen, mind if I join you?" "Please do," Vivienne said, perhaps a bit too quickly. Mrs. McQueen gave her a knowing look but mercifully said nothing, just stood and excused herself to see to other guests. Ethan sat down across from Vivienne, and suddenly the table felt very intimate, despite the other diners around them. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better, thank you. Mrs. McQueen said you arranged for my room. You did not have to do that. It is not charity, just procedure. The territory has a fund for victims of crime, and what happened to you definitely qualifies." He accepted coffee from a server who appeared at his elbow. "I talked to the sheriff, and we are putting together a posse to go after those bandits tomorrow at first light. But I wanted to make sure you were settled before I focused on that. What about the dead driver? Did he have family, wife, and 2 grown sons? I went by their place earlier and told them what happened." Ethan's expression was somber. "They will bury him tomorrow afternoon. The whole town will turn out, I expect. He was well liked." They sat in silence for a moment, united in their grief for a man they had both barely known but whose death had touched them. Then Ethan seemed to shake himself out of his dark thoughts. "Tell me about this observatory you are planning to build. I have never actually seen one before." Vivienne found herself explaining her plans in detail, sketching on a napkin with a borrowed pencil to show him what a small research observatory would look like. "The main structure needs to be circular, with a rotating dome on top. The dome has a slit that opens to allow the telescope to view different parts of the sky as the dome rotates. The telescope itself will be mounted on a precision platform that can track the apparent movement of stars as the Earth rotates." Ethan studied her sketch with genuine interest. "How big are we talking?" "The dome should be about 20 feet in diameter, with the whole structure maybe 15 feet tall. Not enormous by observatory standards, but sufficient for my purposes. The telescope I brought is a 6-inch refractor, which is excellent for the kind of work I do." "And you plan to build this yourself?" "Oh, no. I will need to hire carpenters and builders who know what they are doing, but I will oversee the construction to make sure it meets the precise specifications required. The mount has to be absolutely level and stable, for instance, or the observations will be worthless." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "I might be able to help with that. Not the building itself. I am handy with tools, but this is beyond my skill. But I know most of the carpenters in town, and I know which ones do quality work and which ones cut corners. I could introduce you, help you make sure you get people you can trust." "Would you?" Vivienne felt a rush of gratitude. "That would be tremendously helpful. I am good at many things, but judging the character of frontier builders is not one of them." "Then we will work together on it." Ethan smiled at her, and Vivienne felt warmth spread through her chest. "When are you planning to visit your property?" "I suppose I should go as soon as possible to see what I am working with. Tomorrow I will be out tracking those bandits," Ethan said, regret clear in his voice. "But the day after, I could take you out there, show you around. It would be good for you to have someone along who knows the area anyway. There are things you need to know: where the water sources are, what the winter weather is like, where the property lines actually run." "I would like that very much," Vivienne said, and realized she meant it more than she had meant anything in a long time. The prospect of spending more time with Ethan, of having him show her the land that would become her home, filled her with an anticipation that had little to do with scientific research, and everything to do with the way he looked at her, like she was someone worth protecting, worth knowing. They talked late into the evening, the dining room gradually emptying around them until they were the last ones left. Vivienne told him about her observations, about the star clusters she was trying to map and why it mattered. Ethan told her about Montana, about the changing seasons and the wildlife and the way the land looked different under every shift of light. He told her about his work as a marshal, the satisfaction of bringing criminals to justice, but also the frustration when the law fell short, when politics or corruption got in the way of what was right. Finally, Mrs. McQueen appeared and cleared her throat meaningfully. "I hate to interrupt, but I need to close up the dining room. You two are welcome to continue your conversation in the lobby." They both stood, a bit sheepishly. Ethan walked Vivienne to the base of the stairs that led up to the guest rooms. In the lamplight of the lobby, his eyes looked darker, more intense. "Thank you for today," Vivienne said softly, "for saving my life, for getting me here safely, for everything. I am just glad I was there when you needed help." Ethan reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle. "Get some rest, Miss Sinclair. You have been through an ordeal, Vivienne," she said. "If you are going to be Ethan, then I should be Vivienne." His smile was like sunrise. "Vivienne, sleep well. I will see you when I get back from chasing down those bandits." "Be careful," she said, and was surprised by the intensity of her own concern. She had known this man for less than a day, and yet the thought of him riding into danger made her chest tighten with worry. "Always am," he assured her. Then he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture that felt both courtly and intimate. "Good night, Vivienne." She floated up the stairs to her room, her hand still tingling from his kiss. When she finally lay down in the comfortable bed, her mind was too full for sleep. She kept replaying the day, the terror of the bandit attack, the relief when Ethan appeared, the long ride with his arms around her, the easy conversation over dinner. It was absurd, she told herself. She had come to Montana to study the stars, to build her career, to make discoveries that would establish her reputation in the scientific community. Romance had not been part of her plans, especially not romance with a frontier lawman whose life was so different from everything she had known. But as she drifted toward sleep, it was not star charts or astronomical calculations that filled her thoughts. It was gray eyes and a gentle smile, strong hands and a voice that made her feel safe. It was the way Ethan had looked at her across the dinner table, like she was the most fascinating thing he had ever encountered. The next 2 days passed in a strange mixture of activity and waiting. Vivienne visited the telegraph office and wired her bank in Boston, requesting a transfer of funds. She met with the land agent, a rotund man named Mr. Henderson, who showed her the deed to her property and confirmed the boundaries. She bought a few essential clothes from the general store, putting them on account against her expected funds. But through it all, part of her mind was always on Ethan, out there somewhere tracking dangerous men. Mrs. McQueen noticed her distraction and smiled knowingly but said nothing, just made sure Vivienne ate regular meals and got enough sleep. On the evening of the second day, word came that the posse was returning. Vivienne found herself on the hotel porch as the riders came down the main street in the gathering dusk. She picked out Ethan immediately, riding at the front on his chestnut horse. He looked tired and dusty but whole and unharmed. Relief flooded through her so strongly that her knees went weak. Ethan saw her waiting and guided his horse directly to the hotel. He dismounted and climbed the porch steps, pulling off his hat. "Miss Sinclair, Vivienne, good to see you." "Did you catch them?" she asked. "We did. They are in the jail now, waiting for the circuit judge to come through next month. They will stand trial for murder and robbery." His expression was grim with satisfaction. "They will not hurt anyone else. I'm glad." And she was, though part of her wished they could talk about anything other than bandits and violence. "Are you all right? You look exhausted." 2 days in the saddle will do that, but I am fine, just need a hot meal and a night's sleep." He studied her face. "Are we still on for tomorrow?" "Visiting your property, if you are not too tired." "I will be fine by morning. Pick you up at 8. We can make a day of it, take a picnic lunch if you like, give you a real chance to explore the land." Vivienne felt her heart lift. "I would love that." True to his word, Ethan appeared the next morning at precisely 8, riding his chestnut horse and leading a gentle-looking mare. Mrs. McQueen had insisted on packing them a lunch basket, which Ethan secured behind his saddle with practiced ease. "This is Daisy," Ethan said, indicating the mare. "She belongs to the livery stable owner, but he lets me borrow her when I need a second horse. She is as calm as they come, perfect for someone still getting used to Western riding." Vivienne was grateful for his tact in not directly mentioning her limited riding skills. With his help, she mounted Daisy and settled herself as comfortably as she could in the saddle. She wore a practical split skirt she had purchased at the general store, much better suited to riding than her traveling dresses. They rode north out of Miles City, following a wagon track that gradually faded into open prairie. The morning was glorious, the September air crisp and clear, the sky a deep blue that seemed to go on forever. Wildflowers still bloomed in sheltered spots, purple asters and yellow rabbit brush. A cool breeze carried the scent of sage and grass. Ethan rode beside her, close enough that they could talk easily. He pointed out landmarks, teaching her to read the land the way he did. "That line of cottonwoods marks a creek that runs most of the year. Those darker patches are buffalo wallows, where the old herds used to roll in the dirt. See how that hill has a different color? That is sandstone, good for building if you need it." Vivienne absorbed it all, fascinated by this new way of seeing the landscape. Back east, the land had been tamed, divided into neat parcels, covered with roads and buildings. Here it still felt wild and endless, full of possibilities. After about an hour's ride, Ethan pointed to a rise ahead. "That should be your property line, according to the description Mr. Henderson gave me. The boundary runs from that lightning-struck pine to the big rocks by the draw, then north to the ridge." They crossed onto her land, and Vivienne felt a thrill of ownership. This was hers, these 10 acres of Montana grassland and sky. Ethan led her to the highest point on the property, a gentle hill that offered views in all directions. "This would be your building site," he said, dismounting and helping her down. "High enough for good viewing, but not so exposed that the winter winds will tear your observatory apart. And see that draw over there? Creek runs through its spring and summer, goes dry in late fall usually. Good water source while it is running." Vivienne turned slowly, taking it all in. To the south, she could see Miles City in the distance, small and neat from this height. To the north and east and west, the land rolled away in waves of grass and sage, dotted with occasional stands of pine and cottonwood. The sky dominated everything, vast and clear and breathtakingly beautiful. "It is perfect," she breathed. "Ethan, it is absolutely perfect." He stood beside her, his shoulder almost touching hers. "I am glad. I was hoping you would like it. Montana can be harsh, especially for people not used to it, but when it is beautiful, there is nowhere else like it." They spent the morning exploring the property. Ethan showed her where previous owners had put in a fence line, long since fallen into disrepair. He pointed out a spring that bubbled up near the northern boundary, cold and clear, that would provide year-round water. He helped her pace out potential building sites, talking through the practical considerations of drainage and wind protection and access. Around noon, they settled on a flat rock outcropping with a view of the valley and unpacked their lunch. Mrs. McQueen had outdone herself fried chicken, fresh bread, hard-boiled eggs, apples, and a jar of lemonade. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, watching a pair of red-tailed hawks circle overhead. "Can I ask you something?" Vivienne said finally. "Why are you helping me so much?" "I mean, I am grateful, more than I can say, but you barely know me and you must have many demands on your time." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant horizon. "Honestly, I am not entirely sure myself. Part of it is just doing my job. You are a victim of a crime in my jurisdiction, so helping you is part of my responsibility. But that does not explain why I am sitting here on my day off, instead of catching up on paperwork or sleep." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "The truth is, Vivienne, I have not stopped thinking about you since I first saw you step out from those trees 2 days ago. You were scared but trying to be brave, and there was something in your eyes, a kind of fierce intelligence and determination. And then when we talked, when you explained your work and why you came here, I realized you are unlike anyone I have ever met." Vivienne's heart was pounding. "I am just a scientist, nothing special. You are wrong about that." Ethan reached out and took her hand, his thumb stroking gently over her knuckles. "You left everything familiar behind to pursue your dreams in a place you had never seen. You are brilliant and brave, and you look at the stars the way I look at this land, like they are full of mysteries waiting to be understood. How could I not be fascinated by you? I have been thinking about you too," Vivienne admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it is ridiculous. We have only known each other a few days, but when you are around, I feel safe and excited at the same time. When you were out chasing those bandits, I worried about you constantly. And right now, sitting here with you, I cannot imagine wanting to be anywhere else." Ethan moved closer, still holding her hand. "Would you think me too forward if I said I would like to court you properly? Take you to dinner, show you more of Montana, get to know you better. I know your work is important to you, and I would never want to interfere with that. But I would like the chance to be part of your life if you will have me." "I would like that very much," Vivienne said, and then Ethan was cupping her face with his free hand, his touch gentle and careful. He gave her time to pull away, but she did not want to. Instead, she leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that was sweet and tender and full of promise. When they finally drew apart, Both a bit breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably tell you, I have no idea what I am doing. I have never courted an astronomer before. I have never courted anyone, if I am being honest. The job keeps me too busy for much of a social life." Vivienne laughed, feeling giddy with happiness. "Well, I have never been courted by a marshal, so we are even. We will figure it out together." They sat on that sun-warmed rock for another hour, talking and kissing and making plans. Ethan told her about the town's social life, the dances and church suppers and holiday celebrations, where he could properly introduce her to people. Vivienne talked about her research goals, explaining how she hoped to discover previously unknown star clusters and contribute to the field of stellar astronomy. "You know," Ethan said thoughtfully, "there is something poetic about your work. You study the stars, map them, try to understand their nature. I track criminals, map their movements, try to understand what drives them. Different subjects, but maybe similar approaches. I never thought of it that way, but you are right." Vivienne smiled at him. "Though I must say, stars are considerably more predictable than criminals." "And probably better company," Ethan agreed with a grin. As the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, they reluctantly packed up and prepared to ride back to town. But before they mounted their horses, Ethan pulled Vivienne close for another kiss, this one deeper and more passionate than their first. When they broke apart, his eyes were dark with emotion. "I know it is fast," he said, "but I feel like I have been waiting my whole life for you." "Does that sound crazy?" "No," Vivienne said, her hand over his heart, feeling it beat strong and steady under her palm. "It sounds like exactly how I feel too." The ride back to Miles City was slower, both of them reluctant to end the day. They talked about everything and nothing: his childhood on the Wyoming ranch, her years in Boston, favorite books and foods and memories. By the time they reached the edge of town, Vivienne felt like she had known Ethan for years instead of days. He helped her dismount in front of the hotel, his hands lingering at her waist. "Can I see you tomorrow? I have to work, but maybe dinner in the evening." "I would love that." Vivienne reluctantly stepped back, aware of curious eyes watching from the hotel porch. "Thank you for today, Ethan." "It was perfect." "First of many, I hope," he said, and the promise in his voice made her heart soar. Over the following weeks, Vivienne settled into a rhythm of life in Miles City. Her funds arrived from Boston, allowing her to pay her bills and begin planning the construction of her observatory. She hired a crew of carpenters recommended by Ethan, and they began work on clearing and leveling the building site. She spent her days at the property, overseeing the work and making detailed plans for the observatory's specifications. But her evenings belonged to Ethan. He took her to dinner at the finest restaurant in town, where they sat at a corner table and talked until the staff began pointedly stacking chairs. He brought her wildflowers picked on his patrols, arranged in jars with more enthusiasm than skill. He taught her to shoot, standing behind her at a makeshift range outside town, his arms around her as he helped her steady the pistol, both of them pretending the lesson required quite that much physical contact. She showed him the stars through her telescope, which she had set up temporarily on the hotel's roof with Mrs. McQueen's permission. Ethan's wonder when he first saw the rings of Saturn, the moons of Jupiter, the countless stars of the Milky Way matched her own remembered joy at those first discoveries. She loved watching his face as he learned, the way his serious expression softened into childlike amazement. "How can people see this and not believe in something greater than themselves?" he murmured one night, his eye pressed to the telescope's eyepiece. "That is exactly how I feel every time I observe," Vivienne said softly, "like I am touching something infinite and eternal." The town gradually accepted them as a couple. Mrs. McQueen beamed with maternal approval every time Ethan came to call. The sheriff, a gruff man named Tom Wilson who had worked with Ethan for 5 years, told Vivienne she was the best thing that ever happened to his deputy, and to make sure she kept him in line. The carpenters working on the observatory teased Ethan good-naturedly when he visited the work site, calling him Marshal Lovesick, until he threatened to arrest them all for disturbing the peace. In October, the first major test of their relationship came when Ethan had to leave for 2 weeks to transport prisoners to the territorial capital in Helena. Vivienne surprised herself with how much she missed him, how empty the evenings felt without his presence. She threw herself into her work, but even the stars seemed dimmer without Ethan there to share them. He returned in the middle of a cold October night, and the first thing he did was go to the hotel and wake Mrs. McQueen to ask if he could see Vivienne. The good woman, instead of scolding him for the impropriety, actually went upstairs and woke Vivienne herself. Vivienne came down in her dressing gown, her hair loose around her shoulders, and found Ethan waiting in the lobby. He looked exhausted and trail-worn, but his face lit up when he saw her. They met in the middle of the room and he pulled her into his arms, holding her like he would never let go. "I missed you," he said into her hair. "I know 2 weeks is not that long, but it felt like forever." "I missed you too," Vivienne said, not caring that Mrs. McQueen was watching with unabashed interest from the stairs. Every single day. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, and Vivienne felt something settle into place in her heart. This was real. This was lasting. This was love. By November, the observatory's main structure was complete. The circular building stood proud on Vivienne's hill, its wooden walls solid and weather-tight. The dome mechanism was being fabricated by a specialized metalworker in Billings, but everything else was ready. Vivienne had also hired builders to construct a small house adjacent to the observatory, just 3 rooms, but snug and well-built, with a stone fireplace and tight-fitting windows to keep out the Montana winter. Ethan helped her move in, carrying boxes of books and equipment up the hill while she directed traffic. When the last box was placed and the workers had left, they stood together in the main room of the house, which would serve as both living space and study. "It is not much yet," Vivienne said, looking around at the bare walls and simple furniture, "but it will be home." "It is more than not much," Ethan said. "You built this, Vivienne. From nothing but an idea and determination, you made something real and permanent. I am so proud of you." She turned to him, overwhelmed by emotion. "I could not have done it without you. The builders you recommended, the advice you gave, the way you supported me through all of this, Ethan, you made this possible." He crossed to her and took her hands. "We make a good team, do not we? You with your stars and science, me with my practical knowledge of the territory, your brilliance and my stubbornness." "I would call it determination, not stubbornness," Vivienne said with a smile. "Same thing, really." Ethan's expression turned serious. "Vivienne, I need to say something, and I am probably going to make a mess of it because I have never said anything like this before. But I love you. I am completely, hopelessly in love with you. You are the smartest, bravest, most fascinating woman I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you, if you will have me." Vivienne's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "I love you too, Ethan. I think I have loved you since that first day, when you rode down from the ridge like something out of a story and made me feel safe when I was terrified. You are good and kind and strong, and you make me feel like I can do anything." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Vivienne melted into his arms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan cupped her face in his hands. "Marry me," he said. "I know we have not been courting that long, only a few months." But I know my heart, and I know I want you as my wife. We can have a long engagement if you want, do everything properly. But say yes, Vivienne. Please say yes." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Rivers." They sealed it with another kiss, standing in the middle of her new house as snow began to fall outside, the first snow of the winter. Through the window, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, and Vivienne thought she had never seen anything more beautiful except for the man holding her in his arms. They decided on a spring wedding, giving Vivienne time to finish setting up the observatory and Ethan time to build an addition onto her small house so they would have proper space for married life. Word of their engagement spread through Miles City within hours, and the town embraced it with enthusiasm. Mrs. McQueen immediately began planning the reception, announcing that the hotel's dining room would host it, and she would personally oversee the food. Women Vivienne barely knew stopped her on the street to offer congratulations and advice. The sheriff presented Ethan with a bottle of whiskey and told him he was a lucky man. The winter passed in a blur of preparation and happiness. The dome for the observatory arrived and was installed just before Christmas, and Vivienne spent the long winter nights doing test observations, calibrating her equipment, beginning her systematic survey of the northern sky. Ethan often joined her, bringing coffee to keep her warm during the cold nights, learning to help with the basic tasks of observation. "See that cluster there?" Vivienne said one January night, pointing to a group of stars visible through the telescope. "That is the Pleiades, also called the Seven Sisters. In Greek mythology, they were the daughters of Atlas, transformed into stars to protect them from Orion's pursuit." Ethan studied the cluster through the eyepiece. "I count more than 7 stars there. You have good eyes." There are actually hundreds of stars in the cluster, but only the brightest 6 or 7 are visible to the naked eye. With the telescope, we can see so many more. Vivienne made a note in her observation log. "I am mapping the fainter members of the cluster, trying to determine which stars are actually part of it and which are just background stars that happen to be in the same line of sight." "How can you tell the difference?" "By tracking their motion over time. Stars in the same cluster move through space together, while background stars move independently. It takes patience and careful measurement, but eventually the pattern reveals itself." Ethan looked up from the telescope, his eyes bright with interest. "That is like detective work. Gathering evidence, looking for patterns, distinguishing signal from noise." "Exactly like that," Vivienne agreed, loving that he understood. "Every science is detective work in its way." On a clear February night, Vivienne made her first significant discovery, a previously unknown cluster of faint stars in the constellation Cassiopeia. She spent 3 nights confirming the observation, checking her calculations over and over until she was certain. When she was finally sure, she ran down the hill to the house where Ethan was reading by the fire. "I found one," she announced, breathless with excitement. "A new cluster never catalogued before. Ethan, this could establish my reputation. Other astronomers will have to acknowledge my work now." He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing. "I never doubted you for a second. You are brilliant, and now the whole scientific world will know it." That night they celebrated with a bottle of wine Mrs. McQueen had given them as an engagement present, sitting by the fire and talking about the future. Vivienne would write up her discovery and submit it to the leading astronomical journals back east. She would continue her survey, looking for more clusters. She would build her reputation and contribute to humanity's understanding of the cosmos. "And you will do it all from right here," Ethan said, holding her close. "Our home, our life together. As March arrived and the snow began to melt, wedding preparations intensified. Vivienne ordered a dress from a seamstress in Billings, a simple but elegant white silk that made her feel like a princess. Ethan worked with a carpenter to craft a set of bedroom furniture, his wedding gift to her, each piece sanded and finished with painstaking care. They made lists of guests, planned the ceremony, debated the merits of various flower arrangements with an intensity that made Mrs. McQueen laugh. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in April, contingent on the weather cooperating. As the date approached, Vivienne felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had never imagined herself as the marrying type, had always assumed her work would be her whole life. But Ethan had shown her that love and work were not mutually exclusive, that she could have both passion for the stars and passion for a partner who supported her dreams. 2 weeks before the wedding, Vivienne's aunt arrived from Boston, having made the long train journey to attend. Aunt Margaret was a formidable woman in her 60s, tall and thin and sharp-eyed. Vivienne had worried about her aunt's reaction to the engagement. Margaret had always been protective, and marrying a frontier lawman after knowing him less than a year might seem reckless. But when Ethan came to dinner the night of Margaret's arrival, wearing his best suit and bearing flowers, Vivienne watched her aunt's expression soften. They talked for hours, Margaret asking pointed questions about Ethan's background, his work, his plans for the future. He answered with honest directness, not trying to hide the dangers of his job or the hardships of frontier life, but also making clear his deep love for Vivienne and his commitment to supporting her work. At the end of the evening, Margaret took Vivienne aside. "He is a good man," she said simply. "Different from what I would have chosen for you back east, but I can see he makes you happy. And more than that, he respects your intelligence and your dreams. Hold on to that, dear girl. It is rarer than you know." The night before the wedding, Vivienne stood alone in the observatory, looking up at the stars. Tomorrow her life would change forever. She would take Ethan's name, promise to be his wife, begin a new chapter of her life. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. She heard footsteps on the path and turned to see Ethan approaching. "I thought I would find you here," he said. "Could not sleep either." "Too much thinking," Vivienne admitted. "Is it bad luck to see each other the night before?" "Only if we believe in superstitions, which I do not think either of us does." Ethan joined her at the telescope. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. The future mostly, what our life will be like." She looked up at him. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," he admitted with a grin. "But in a good way. Like standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, but knowing it is going to be an amazing journey." Vivienne laughed. "That is exactly how I feel. We are quite a pair, are not we? The astronomer and the lawman, both of us explorers in our own way." Ethan took her hand and pointed up at the night sky. "You know what I think about when I look up there now? I think about how small we are, how brief our lives are in the grand scheme of things. And I think about how miraculous it is that in all this vastness, in all the chaos of the universe, somehow I found you, or you found me, however it works." "Maybe we found each other," Vivienne said softly. "Maybe it was always supposed to happen." "You are the star I have been searching for," Ethan said, and Vivienne felt her heart swell. "I did not even know I was searching until I saw you step out from those trees with dirt on your dress and determination in your eyes. But that is when my real life started, Vivienne. Everything before that was just waiting." She stood on her toes to kiss him, sweet and gentle. "That is the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." "I have been practicing," he admitted. "I wanted to get it right." They stayed in the observatory until nearly dawn, talking and kissing and watching the stars wheel overhead. When they finally parted to get a few hours of sleep before the wedding, Vivienne felt completely at peace. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, with just enough breeze to stir the new leaves on the cottonwoods. The ceremony was held in the little church on Main Street, with what seemed like the entire town of Miles City in attendance. Vivienne walked down the aisle on her Aunt Margaret's arm, her eyes fixed on Ethan waiting at the altar in a new black suit, his face alight with joy. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Vivienne heard herself make her vows in a voice that shook only slightly. She heard Ethan promise to love and cherish her, his voice strong and clear. She felt him slide a gold ring onto her finger, and she did the same for him. And then the minister was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Ethan was kissing her in front of God and the whole town, and everyone was cheering. The reception at the hotel was joyous chaos. There was more food than seemed possible, including Mrs. McQueen's famous huckleberry pie. There was music and dancing, speeches and toasts. Sheriff Wilson stood up and told embarrassing stories about Ethan's early days as a deputy. Aunt Margaret spoke movingly about Vivienne's father and how proud he would have been to see this day. And Mrs. McQueen wept openly through her toast about how she had known from the first day she saw them together that they were meant to be. As the sun set and the party showed no signs of slowing, Ethan pulled Vivienne aside. "Want to escape? We could ride up to the house, watch the stars come out from our own land as husband and wife." "I thought you would never ask," Vivienne said with a laugh. They slipped away amid good-natured teasing from the guests and rode up to their home on the hill. Inside, Ethan had prepared a surprise. He had brought up flowers and candles, making the simple house as romantic as any palace. They made love for the first time as husband and wife, tender and passionate, discovering each other with gentle patience. Later they lay together in bed, Vivienne's head on Ethan's chest, listening to his heartbeat. Through the window, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Happy?" Ethan asked, his hand stroking her hair. "Happier than I knew was possible," Vivienne said. "You, same. I keep thinking I am going to wake up and discover this was all a dream. If it is a dream, we are both having it." Vivienne tilted her head to look up at him. "I love you, Ethan Rivers." "I love you too, Vivienne Rivers," he smiled. "That sounds good, does not it, Vivienne Rivers?" "It sounds perfect." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Ethan moved his belongings from his small room above the marshal's office into the house, and they established a comfortable routine. He would ride into town most mornings to work, while Vivienne focused on her astronomical research. Evenings, they would have dinner together, and often Ethan would help with observations if Vivienne was working. His days off, they spent together exploring the surrounding country, fishing in the Yellowstone River, visiting neighboring ranches. Vivienne continued her work with single-minded determination. Her discovery of the new star cluster was published in 3 major journals, bringing her recognition from the astronomical community. She began corresponding regularly with other astronomers, sharing data and coordinating observations. Several colleagues expressed interest in visiting her Montana observatory, impressed by the quality of her work. Ethan, meanwhile, continued his work as a marshal, though he was more careful now about the risks he took. Having someone to come home to changed his perspective on danger. He still pursued criminals and upheld the law, but he thought harder about consequences, about Vivienne waiting for him at home. In July, a famous astronomer from Harvard named Professor Whitaker came to visit the observatory. He was an older man, distinguished in the field, and Vivienne was nervous about his assessment of her work. But Ethan reminded her that she had nothing to prove. Her discoveries spoke for themselves. Professor Whitaker spent 3 days examining the observatory, reviewing Vivienne's data, and conducting his own observations. On the last evening, he joined Ethan and Vivienne for dinner at their house. "Mrs. Rivers," he said formally, "I must tell you that this is one of the finest small observatories I have visited. Your data collection methods are rigorous, your calculations are precise, and your insights into stellar clustering are genuinely groundbreaking. You are doing work that rivals anything being done in the major institutions back east." Vivienne felt tears of gratitude prick her eyes. "Thank you, Professor. That means more than you can know." "I would like to propose a collaboration," Whitaker continued. "Harvard has resources you lack: larger telescopes, more assistants, better funding. But what we do not have is your clear skies and your fresh perspective. If you were willing to share your data and coordinate observations with our team, it would benefit both institutions tremendously." "I would be honored," Vivienne said immediately. Beside her, Ethan squeezed her hand under the table, his pride evident in his expression. As summer turned to fall and then winter again, Vivienne's reputation continued to grow. She published 3 more papers, each one contributing new understanding to the field of stellar astronomy. Letters arrived regularly from colleagues around the country, some offering collaboration, others debating her findings, all of them treating her as an equal in the scientific community. But as much as she loved her work, it was her marriage that brought Vivienne the deepest joy. She and Ethan fit together like 2 pieces of a puzzle, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other through challenges. When she struggled with a particularly difficult calculation, he would sit with her and talk it through, his logical lawman's mind often seeing patterns she had missed. When he dealt with difficult cases, she would listen and offer perspective, her scientific training helping him think through evidence and motives. In February of 1886, nearly 2 years after they first met, Vivienne discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then a slow smile spread across his face, growing until it seemed to light up the whole room. "A baby! We are having a baby." "In August, the doctor thinks," Vivienne confirmed. Ethan whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "Vivienne, we are going to be parents." "I know it is going to complicate things," Vivienne began, but Ethan cut her off with a kiss. "It is going to be wonderful," he said firmly. "Yes, we will have to figure some things out, but we will do it together the way we do everything." The pregnancy was not easy. Vivienne struggled with morning sickness through the spring, and the Montana summer heat made the later months uncomfortable. But Ethan was endlessly patient and supportive, taking on more household duties, bringing her cool water and fresh fruit, rubbing her swollen feet at the end of long days. She continued her work as long as she could, though she had to admit that climbing the stairs to the observatory dome became increasingly difficult as her belly grew. Ethan rigged up a chair with cushions at the base of the telescope so she could observe while sitting, and he learned to help adjust the instrument under her direction. "Our child is going to grow up thinking it is perfectly normal to spend evenings looking at stars," Ethan observed one night as he helped Vivienne back down the stairs. "Is that a problem?" Vivienne asked. "Not even a little bit. I just hope they inherit your brain and not my stubborn streak." "They will probably get both," Vivienne said with a laugh. Poor child. Their son was born on a sweltering August night, arriving in a rush after a short but intense labor. Doc Franklin delivered him in the bedroom of their house with Mrs. McQueen assisting and Ethan pacing anxiously in the next room. When it was finally over, and the baby's lusty cries filled the air, Vivienne felt exhausted and exhilarated and overwhelmed with love. Ethan came in, his face pale with worry until he saw Vivienne sitting up in bed, tired but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Is he all right? Are you all right?" "We are both fine," Vivienne assured him. "Come meet your son." Ethan approached almost reverently and took the baby in his arms with surprising confidence. He gazed down at the small, red face, at the tiny fingers curled into fists, and Vivienne saw tears slip down his cheeks. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never quite decided. Now, looking at their son, Vivienne knew exactly what felt right. "What about James, after my father? James Rivers." Ethan tested the name, smiling. "I like it. James Rivers, welcome to the world." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming, and more wonderful than Vivienne had imagined. James was a good baby, healthy and alert, with his father's gray eyes and what looked like it might be his mother's dark hair. Ethan proved to be a natural father, completely unafraid of diapers or spit-up or midnight feedings. He would walk James around the house at night, singing soft cowboy ballads until the baby fell asleep against his shoulder. Vivienne's research slowed during those early months, but she found she did not mind as much as she had feared. She had thought she would resent the time away from her telescope, but instead, she discovered a different kind of wonder in watching her son grow and change. And Ethan made sure she still had time for astronomy, taking James on long rides or watching him while Vivienne worked in the observatory. As James grew from infant to toddler, he proved to be as curious and energetic as both his parents. He would toddle around the observatory, fascinated by the equipment. Ethan built him a small rocking horse and James would ride it for hours, pretending to chase bad guys like his father. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Vivienne continued her research, now with the help of an assistant she hired from the university in Bozeman. She discovered 2 more star clusters and made significant contributions to understanding stellar evolution. Her work was cited by other astronomers, and she was invited to present at conferences, though she usually declined, preferring to stay in Montana with her family. Ethan rose through the ranks, eventually becoming the chief deputy marshal for the territory. He still did field work when necessary, but more of his time was spent on administration and training younger deputies. The railroad continued to bring changes to Montana, more people settling, more towns springing up. But Miles City remained home, and their house on the hill remained their sanctuary. In 1889, Vivienne gave birth to their daughter, Anna. She had Ethan's serious expression and Vivienne's sharp intelligence, and from the time she could talk, she asked endless questions about everything. 2 years later, a second son arrived, Thomas, who inherited his father's easy smile and his mother's love of mathematics. Their house grew with the family, additions and modifications made as needed. The observatory remained Vivienne's domain, though all 3 children were taught to look through the telescope and appreciate the wonders of the night sky. Ethan built a small barn for the growing collection of horses, and Vivienne planted a garden that thrived despite the sometimes harsh climate. In November of 1889, Montana became a state instead of a territory, and there was great celebration throughout Miles City. Ethan was appointed as one of the first U.S. Marshals for the new state, a position of honor and responsibility. At the ceremony, with Vivienne and the children watching proudly, he took his oath of office with one hand on a Bible and the other raised high. That night, they sat together on the porch of their house, watching the stars come out. The children were asleep inside, worn out from the day's festivities. Ethan had his arm around Vivienne, and she leaned into his warmth. "Can you believe it has been 5 years since we met?" Vivienne asked. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together." "I know what you mean." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "I still remember every detail of that day. The way you looked stepping out from the trees, scared but trying not to show it. The way you felt in my arms during the ride to town. The first time you smiled at me, and I thought my heart would stop. I remember thinking you were the most handsome man I had ever seen," Vivienne admitted. "And then when you started talking, when I realized you were intelligent and kind and genuinely interested in my work, I knew I was in trouble." "Good trouble, though," Ethan said with a smile. "The best trouble." Vivienne looked up at the stars, at the familiar constellations she had mapped and studied for years. "You know what I was thinking the other day? About that first night when you helped me look through the telescope and I showed you the stars. You said something about how people who see this must believe in something greater than themselves. I remember. Well, I do believe in something greater now, not just the vastness of space or the beauty of the cosmos, but love. The kind of love that changes everything, that makes two separate people into one family. I did not understand that before I met you, Ethan. I thought I was complete on my own, that my work was enough. But you showed me I was wrong. You are the greatest discovery I ever made." Ethan turned her to face him, his eyes bright with emotion in the starlight. "And you are mine. You and our children, this life we built together, it is more than I ever dreamed was possible. I was just a lawman doing my job when I rode down that ridge 5 years ago. I had no idea I was riding toward my whole future." They kissed, tender and loving, the kind of kiss that spoke of years of partnership and intimacy. When they drew apart, Vivienne smiled up at her husband. "You know what you said that night before our wedding? About how I was the star you had been searching for. I remember. I meant every word. Well, you are my star too, my constant, my guide, the light that led me home." Vivienne gestured up at the sky. "All those stars up there, all those celestial wonders I have spent years studying, none of them compare to what I found here on Earth with you." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Inside, their children slept safely. Around them, the Montana night was alive with sound, crickets chirping, an owl calling in the distance, the wind whispering through the grass. It was the sound of home, of peace, of a life fully lived. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both large and small. James grew into a serious young man who decided to follow his father into law enforcement. Anna showed a talent for mathematics that rivaled her mother's, and announced at age 12 that she wanted to attend university to study engineering. Thomas proved to be the artist of the family, spending hours sketching the Montana landscape with remarkable skill. Ethan and Vivienne watched their children grow with pride and some bittersweet awareness that their time as a young family was passing. But they also grew closer to each other, their love deepening with each passing year. They developed a shorthand of looks and touches, could communicate entire conversations with just a glance. They still made time for each other, still went on rides across the prairie, still spent evenings in the observatory talking about stars and life and everything in between. In 1895, on the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Ethan surprised Vivienne with a gift. He led her out to the observatory, where he had set up an elaborate surprise. There, mounted beside her original telescope, was a new, larger instrument, a 12-inch reflector telescope that must have cost a small fortune. "Ethan," Vivienne breathed, running her hands over the smooth brass fittings. "This is incredible. But how did you afford this?" "I have been saving for 3 years," he admitted. Working some extra jobs, putting money aside. You have given me so much, Vivienne. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible. I wanted to give you something that honored your work, your passion. This telescope is from one of the best makers in the country. Professor Whitaker helped me order it and have it shipped out here. Vivienne felt tears streaming down her face as she threw her arms around her husband. Thank you. Thank you so much. This is the most thoughtful, wonderful gift anyone has ever given me. That night they stayed up until dawn using the new telescope together. The improved optics revealed details Vivienne had never seen before: individual stars in distant clusters, the subtle bands in Jupiter's atmosphere, the delicate structure of nebulae. It was like seeing the universe anew, and sharing that experience with Ethan made it all the more precious. As they finally headed back to the house in the early morning light, Ethan took Vivienne's hand. Happy anniversary, my love. Here is to 10 more years and 10 after that, and all the years we are given. All the years, Vivienne echoed, squeezing his hand. Forever if we are lucky. The children grew and eventually left home, one by one, to pursue their own dreams. James became a deputy marshal like his father and married a rancher's daughter from Billings. Anna attended university in Chicago and became one of the first female engineers in the country. Thomas traveled to Paris to study art and sent home paintings of European scenes that Vivienne and Ethan hung proudly on their walls. But even with the children gone, Ethan and Vivienne never felt alone. They had each other, and they had their work, and they had the life they had built together in Montana. Ethan eventually retired from active marshal duties, but stayed on as a consultant and trainer for younger lawmen. Vivienne continued her research well into her 50s, her observatory becoming a destination for astronomers from around the world who wanted to visit the legendary Dr. Vivienne Rivers. On a clear September evening in 1905, exactly 20 years after the bandit attack that had brought them together, Ethan and Vivienne sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were both in their early 50s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined by years of Montana sun and wind. But to each other they were as beautiful as the day they met. Remember this date? Vivienne asked, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder. How could I forget? This is the day my life really began. Ethan kissed her hair. The day I rode down that ridge and saw you for the first time. The day you saved me from bandits, and I did not know it yet, but I was already falling in love with you. Vivienne smiled at the memory. 20 years. It has gone by so fast. And so slow, Ethan added. Every day with you has been a gift, but it has also felt eternal, like we have lived a dozen lifetimes together. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Vivienne said, I got a letter yesterday from the Astronomical Society. They want to name my star cluster after me. The one I discovered that first winter after we married. It will be officially designated as the Sinclair Rivers Cluster. That is wonderful, Ethan said, genuinely delighted. You deserve that recognition. I thought about asking them to just use Rivers, not Sinclair Rivers, Vivienne admitted. But then I realized that keeping my maiden name in the designation honors my father, who started me on this path. And using Rivers honors you, who made it possible for me to continue. You honor me every day, Ethan said quietly. By being who you are, by loving me, by building this life with me. I am the luckiest man alive, Vivienne. I have never doubted that for a moment. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they walked hand in hand to the observatory. Inside, Vivienne's telescope stood ready, pointing toward the heavens. She made some adjustments, then stepped back and gestured for Ethan to look. Through the eyepiece, he saw a dense cluster of stars, hundreds of points of light arranged in a beautiful, complex pattern against the velvet darkness of space. Is that your cluster? The Sinclair Rivers cluster? That is it, Vivienne confirmed. My legacy to the scientific world, proof that I was here, that I observed and discovered and contributed to human knowledge. Ethan stepped back from the telescope and pulled his wife into his arms. You have other legacies too, 3 amazing children. A lifetime of discoveries and research, and a husband who loves you more with every passing day. And you have your legacies, Vivienne said, reaching up to cup his face. Years of service protecting people, training the next generation of lawmen, children who have grown into good, strong adults. And a wife who cannot imagine her life without you. They kissed, soft and sweet, the kiss of 2 people who had been together so long they knew each other's rhythms perfectly. When they drew apart, Vivienne smiled up at the man who had been her partner for 20 years. You know what I never told you, she said. That first day after you rescued me, during that long ride to Miles City, I remember looking up at the sky and thinking how beautiful the stars would be here. I was already planning my research, already excited about the work I would do. But there was this moment when I looked up at your face, and I thought the stars could wait. Right then, the most interesting thing in the universe was you. I remember that ride like it was yesterday, Ethan said. Having you in my arms, feeling your heart beating, knowing I would do anything to keep you safe. I told myself I was just doing my job, just being a good lawman. But the truth was, I was already falling for you, hard and fast and completely. We were lucky, Vivienne said, that we found each other in a territory as big as Montana, in a time as wild as the 1880s. What were the odds? About the same as discovering a new star cluster, I would imagine, Ethan said with a smile. Unlikely but not impossible. And when you are looking in the right place at the right time, amazing things can happen. They stayed in the observatory for hours that night, alternating between observing and talking, between scientific work and shared memories. When they finally made their way back to the house in the early morning hours, they walked slowly, savoring the cool night air and the companionable silence. In bed, they lay in each other's arms, both too content to sleep immediately. Through the window, they could see a patch of star-filled sky. Ethan, Vivienne said softly, promise me something, anything. Promise me that no matter how long we live, no matter what changes come, we will always make time for this, for us, for looking at the stars together and remembering how we started. I promise, Ethan said solemnly. Every clear night for the rest of our lives, if that is what you want. Though honestly, Vivienne, I would be happy just sitting in a dark room with you. The stars are beautiful, but you are what makes everything worthwhile. Vivienne felt tears of happiness slip down her cheeks. After 20 years of marriage, Ethan could still make her cry with the simple honesty of his love. I love you so much. More than stars, more than science, more than anything in this world or beyond it. And I love you, Ethan said, wiping away her tears with gentle fingers. My wife, my partner, my star, today and always. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in a love that had weathered 2 decades and would endure for whatever time remained to them. Outside, the Montana night stretched vast and clear, the stars wheeling in their ancient patterns, constant and eternal as the love between the astronomer and the cowboy who had found each other when they both needed it most. Years continued to unfold like the pages of a beloved book, each one adding new chapters to their story. Grandchildren arrived, bringing fresh joy and chaos. Vivienne published her final research paper at age 62, a comprehensive survey of northern celestial clusters that became a standard reference in the field. Ethan trained his last group of young marshals at 65, then retired completely to spend all his time with Vivienne. They grew old together gracefully, their love only deepening as the years passed. When Vivienne's eyes grew too weak for long observation sessions, Ethan would read scientific journals to her by the fire. When Ethan's joints ached from old injuries, Vivienne would rub liniment into them while telling him stories about constellations and ancient myths. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and what seemed like half of Miles City, Vivienne stood to make a toast. She raised her glass and looked at Ethan, her husband of 4 decades, the man who had ridden into her life like a hero from a storybook and never left her side. 40 years ago, she said, her voice still strong despite her age, I came to Montana to study the stars. I thought I knew what I was looking for: new discoveries, scientific glory, a place in the history of astronomy. And I found those things. But I found something far more precious too. I found love. I found a partner who supported my dreams while building dreams of his own. I found a family, a home, a life richer than any I could have imagined. She looked directly at Ethan, her eyes shining. You are the star I have been searching for, Ethan Rivers. You always were and you always will be. Ethan stood and crossed to her, taking her hands in his weathered ones. And you are mine, Vivienne. My constant star, my true north, the light that has guided me for 40 wonderful years. Here is to 40 more, my love. They kissed to thunderous applause, and as Vivienne looked around at the life they had built together, their children and grandchildren, their friends, their community, she felt complete. The stars would continue to wheel overhead, indifferent to human joy and sorrow. But here on Earth, in this moment, she had everything she had ever truly needed. The years that followed were gentler, quieter. Vivienne and Ethan spent their days in simple pleasures, walks around their property, visits from grandchildren, evenings on the porch watching sunsets. The observatory still stood on the hill, now maintained by the university in Bozeman as a historical site and active research facility. Young astronomers came to work there, inspired by Dr. Rivers' legacy. Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, after a full life of service and love. Vivienne held his hand as he slipped away, whispering her love one last time. At his funeral, the church overflowed with people whose lives he had touched, criminals he had brought to justice who had reformed, young lawmen he had trained, families he had protected. Vivienne lived for 3 more years after Ethan's death, spending her time writing her memoirs and organizing her astronomical observations for future researchers. She was content in those years, never lonely, because Ethan's presence seemed to linger in every corner of their home. She would sometimes talk to him as she worked, telling him about letters from grandchildren or new discoveries other astronomers had made using her data. On her final night, at the age of 81, Vivienne asked her daughter Anna to help her up to the observatory one last time. There, she looked through her telescopes at the stars she had studied for over 50 years. She found the Sinclair Rivers cluster, that first major discovery she had made so long ago, and smiled. I am coming, my love, she whispered to the stars, to Ethan, to the universe itself. I am ready. She passed away that night in her sleep, in the house she and Ethan had built, surrounded by the evidence of a life fully and wonderfully lived. Her last words, written in her journal found beside her bed, were simple and profound. Look to the stars, but never forget that the greatest wonders are found in the people we love. I searched the heavens and found my treasure on earth. What a blessed, beautiful life it has been. Vivienne was laid to rest beside Ethan in the Miles City Cemetery, under a sky they had both loved. On their shared headstone, their children had inscribed a simple epitaph. Ethan and Vivienne Rivers. He showed her the earth, she showed him the stars. Together they found heaven. The observatory continued to operate for decades after Vivienne's death, a lasting monument to her work and passion. And on clear Montana nights, when the stars blazed bright and close, locals would sometimes tell the story of the cowboy marshal who rescued the astronomer from bandits, and how she had told him he was the star she had been searching for. It became a legend in Miles City, a tale of love and courage and two people who found each other against all odds in the vast wilderness of the American West. Their story lived on in their descendants, who spread across the country but always remembered their roots in Montana. It lived on in the Sinclair Rivers cluster, a permanent marker in the celestial sphere bearing witness to Vivienne's brilliance. And it lived on in the house on the hill, where new families made new memories, but where, on quiet nights, you could almost feel the presence of the astronomer and the cowboy who had built there forever under the Montana sky. The stars wheeled on, eternal and indifferent as they always had and always would. But for one brief, shining moment in the vastness of time and space, two souls had found each other and built something that mattered, a love that transcended science and law, east and west, earth and sky. They had found each other, held fast, and created a legacy that would endure long after the stars themselves had faded. And if love can be measured not in years but in moments of perfect happiness, in shared dreams and mutual support, in laughter and tears and everything in between, then Ethan and Vivienne Rivers had infinity. They had forever. They had each other, and that was more than enough.